Good evening, everyone. It is good to be with you again tonight. Sorry I missed last Wednesday night. Just some unfortunate events that I needed to take care of, but glad to be back tonight. Hey, if you are listening and you see anything strange going on, please give me a text or put something on Facebook. I'm getting some messages about errors in bit rate and things like that with the broadcast. So I think everything's working okay, but just in case it's not, if you need to, please send me a text and let me know if things aren't going well. So it looks like from my end they're going well, but there are a couple of messages about the cache being full and high bit rate, but I think we're okay. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we are going to be looking at Matthew chapter 7. I have to somewhat confess to you, I had in mind that I was going to do a series of lessons on the parables that I have prepared to do. But there's going to kind of be a change. I want to talk about that for just a second. Hang on, let me fix this error message over here. So starting June, I think it's June the 14th. Let me look at my calendar. I should have looked at this before I jumped on here. But starting June the 14th, we are going to be doing something different on Wednesday night with, it won't really be a live stream. We're looking at doing a program that's kind of designed for the whole church. So it will be designed for adults, kids, teenagers. It'll be a combination of some videos, some Bible lessons, some games. It's going to be designed to help maybe each family sit down and have some time for home Bible study. Kind of sit down as a family, not for a long period of time. Oh, hang on, I think I could fix that. So the person that just texted me and said I was too quiet, I don't know which way this thing turns, so that should be louder. So let's see if that helps. I had the microphone turned down from another Zoom call that I was doing today. So anyway,
I'm not sure I understand.
And Siri's talking to me. So it's going to be designed kind of for like a whole family, like a 30 to 45 minute interaction kind of thing. Really excited about it. I think it's going to be some really cool stuff. And it'll be adult appropriate, kid appropriate, teenager appropriate. It's kind of a whole church thing. Then we'll tie all of that together on the fifth Sunday night with kind of a special event. But anyway, I'm looking forward to that. The point of all of that is the first 7 lessons are actually going to be on parables. So some of the parables that I was going to do on Wednesday night, I'm not going to be doing those because I don't want to do the parables on in this class on Wednesday night and turn around and start those again in June. So I am going to switch content for Wednesday night from next week to the end of May. And I don't know what that will be yet. If you have a suggestion, you are welcome to send that to me, text it, email it, drop it in the chat box if there's something in particular you want to study. But we'll figure it out kind of on the move. Just wanted you to know what was going on. But I do want you to know I'm really excited about what we're going to do with the stuff on Wednesday night. Really looking forward to that. Okay, so hopefully volume is okay. It's turned up as loud as I can turn it up. So maybe I'll just talk louder. Try that. So I started out tonight. I am going to, but when I started out for the class tonight, I need to make this a little, well, I'll do that in a second. Now, I started out to talk about the parable of the wise and the foolish builders. And we're pretty familiar with that parable. It's one that most of us know. We grew up singing the Vacation Bible School song about it. The wise man built his house on the rock. The foolish man built his house on the sand. We used to clap our hands, and when the house on the sand fell. But as I began studying that, and I began looking at it, the more I looked at it, the more I looked at it within a context of the entire scripture, of the entire chapter. So as I went through that, I thought, well, I don't really want to do the wise and foolish builders without putting that within context of all of Matthew chapter 7. I'm really big on context. Context, context, context. That was emphasized to me when I was like learning to be a preacher in school, and I just think it's really important. So to do the wise and foolish builders, I want to pause a little bit, and I want to go all the way back to Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, and I want to tie all of Matthew chapter 7 together into our understanding of the wise and foolish builders. And it could be that this takes more than 1 week. So if it does, it just does. And I will try not to be too long-winded. Sometimes I get a text that says you're being a little bit long-winded. So I'm going to try to keep it to about 30 minutes. But if I get long-winded, send me a text as you're getting long-winded, and we'll start with something else, and we'll finish this up next week. So Matthew chapter 7, let's go to verse 1. And then we'll go through the chapter and bring it to culmination, the wise and foolish builders. We're pretty familiar with Matthew chapter 7. It is, it's honestly one of those verses that you hear many people quote, and I think when we quote it, sometimes we miss the point of it. We miss what Jesus is really talking about. So the first 2 verses, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Often we hear this verse because someone will say, well, you shouldn't judge. And they will say, well, you can't look and judge me because you're not supposed to judge. Jesus said, do not judge, so you are not supposed to judge. Well, I think if you look at it in context, I don't think he's talking about every aspect of judgment. I think he's talking about the maybe the self-righteous, hypocritical type judgment that sometimes we have, and it's wrong to do that. If you look back to Matthew chapter 6, and we're not going to do this, but just for just a second. But if you remember Matthew chapter 6, he talks about giving to the needy and don't do it like the hypocrites. And he talks about prayer and don't pray like the hypocrites, and fasting, and you're not supposed to fast like the hypocrites. And then he talks about storing up our treasures in heaven, and he talks about do not worry. And then he gets to this passage where he's talking about do not judge. And so as you kind of look at this verse, it's first you need to start out with how is it that you judge yourself. The way that you judge is the way that you're going to be judged. And I think, or you too will be judged. The way that's written, it's talking about the final judgment of God. However you judge is the way that God will judge you. The measure that you use, that's the type of measure that is going to be measured to you. And then remember, right after that, he has this great example that he puts in the text. So you have a speck of, you see your brother or your sister, and they have a speck of sawdust. They have some, maybe it's hard to say that faults are small and minute because sin is sin. But there's just this is a parable. There's just a little thing, right? It's just a little speck of dust in their eye. And you decide that you're going to take that speck of dust out of their eye. But at the same time, you have like a beam, a log that's sticking out of your eye. And the example that Jesus gives is obvious, isn't it? If you've got that sticking in your eye, how is it that you're going to see that little speck to clearly remove the speck from your brother's eye? So the point of Jesus and do not judge is when you judge, don't be self-righteous or hypocritical. Don't be too severe. Be compassionate. Be understanding. See clearly to help other people. Be a kind of person that even though you might see some fault in someone else, you also recognize your own fault. So therefore, you can be compassionate and understanding and helpful. It reminds me of a verse in Galatians where if you see a brother who's caught in a sin, then you restore him gently. So you do that with a humble, gentle spirit. You don't do it in a harsh, self-righteous, hypocritical type of spirit. And you're careful even when you rescue or attempt to rescue that other person, so that you don't get caught in the same sin, because you're not immune to that sin either. Or 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and I didn't, let me see if I can pull that up real quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, and it's this verse about there's immorality in the church. And in verse 9, let me get out of the way so you can see this. He says, I have written you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave the world. But I am now writing that you must not associate with anyone who calls himself a brother but is sexually immoral or greedy or an idolater or a slanderer or a drunkard or a swindler. With such a man, do not even eat. What business it is of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked man from among you. Now, the point of that is, that's a totally different class when we get into church discipline, so I don't want to do that tonight. But the point of that is that there is an element of judging that is part of who we are. And it's not that this is just some blanket statement that you're not going to be judged. Everyone is going to be judged. And we judge each other in a way that we encourage and we help and we build up. We don't do it in a way that's harsh and without understanding and hypocritical in the way that we do that. And he's going to take that concept and he's going to add to it as we go through the rest of the chapter. Now, it's interesting when you look at Matthew chapter 7, sometimes it looks like there are these unrelated type thoughts that occur in the text, but they're really not. So in this first section, the thought is that you clear your own eyes and your own judgment, for you tend to make some correction about the judgment of someone else. And then he has this verse 6 that just you look at it and you think, well, how does this apply to the things in verse 1 through 5 and from 7 on? Are they just all kind of unrelated thoughts? And I don't think they are. Do not give dogs what is sacred, and do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under your feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So you think, well, what does that have to do with this idea of judging? So the word used for dog here is kind of the wild dog that would run the street. He's not a domesticated dog. He would eat whatever he could find. He would be considered unclean. And you would not take something that is holy. You wouldn't take something that's sacred and give it to that animal. For example, you wouldn't take meat off of the altar that was dedicated to God and give that to a wild dog that runs the streets. And don't throw your pearls to the pigs. Pearls aren't very good food for pigs. You know, and you think, well, is Jesus calling somebody a dog, or is he calling somebody a pig? You know, is he talking about a certain ethnic group? Or no, it's not. It's not that he is talking about a group, but it has nothing to do with your ethnicity or your color. It you in our judging, you might think in terms of, for example, when Jesus sent the apostles out, and he said, you'll go into a city and you stay in that city, but if you go into a city and the city doesn't accept you and the city rejects you, then you shake the dust off of your feet and you go to another city. And so the dogs and the pigs represent what is the height of uncleanness. So it's there will come a time where even in your spreading the gospel, there are some that just that reject it. They're not going to accept it. I mean, no matter what happens, it's not that you quit trying, but they aren't going to accept it. You try to take the message to those who are trying to be receptive of the message and hear the message. And again, don't take that to mean we don't preach to people who don't want to be preached to. But there will be a time where we understand that someone just completely rejects. And in that case, you know, it's kind of like this concept of shaking the dust of our feet. We move to someone else or something else. You don't throw your pearls to the pigs. You don't give the dogs what is sacred. And it all fits within that context of judging. I hope I explained that well. If I didn't, throw a comment on the Facebook stream or something. I'll try to explain it a little bit better. So there are those that we look at, and we have this aspect of judging where we're supposed to remove our own faults, or at least be faults, before we can adequately try to help someone else with their faults. Again, we're not hypocritical or judgmental. Then there's this idea, but you will encounter people who, no matter what you say or no matter what you do or how you present the gospel, they're just not going to accept it. They aren't going to listen to it. And so then you if you're kind of following Jesus' thought through the process of the chapter, you know, one of the first things you might ask is, how am I going to learn to discern between those groups of people? How am I going to know when to adequately mention to someone about their fault or about their sin? You know, as an elder, it reminds me of Ezekiel when he talks about the shepherds of Israel. So if you see someone doing wrong and you don't confront them about it, then you will share in their sin. Now, if you confront them about it and then they persist in that, then they will suffer the consequences of their sin, but their blood won't be on your head. You won't share the consequences of that sin. So if you think in context of judging others and understanding what is sacred, and that there are those who are going to reject, a very honest question is, how do you discern that? How do you know that? How do you know when it's the right time to shake the dust off of your feet? Or how do you know when it's the right time to approach someone? Or how do you know when you've examined yourself well enough, or at least you're aware of your own sin that makes you understanding and compassionate to go talk to someone else? And so we get into this verse that Jesus has about ask, seek, and knock. And asking, it will be given to you. Seeking, you will find. Knocking, the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks, the door will be open. And which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Again, they aren't all disconnected. They're all very well connected. When you look at this passage in Luke, it says, how much more will your Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him, which is the Spirit which gives us the ability to discern and look and kind of choose and figure out if we're approaching someone with the right spirit or in the right way or with the right amount of love or the right amount of compassion, to make sure that we're not judgmental or hypocritical when we do that. So usually, you read this ask, seek, and knock thing, and a lot of times we're thinking, man, that's just the stuff in life that I want. If I ask and then I seek and then I knock, then God will give me whatever it is that I ask for. So if I didn't get it, it means I didn't ask enough, or I didn't seek enough, or I didn't knock on the door hard enough, because God will just give me whatever I ask for. But that's taking, I think, this out of context. I think it does specifically relate back to how we approach other people and how we judge other people and how we help other people and how we're compassionate to other people. We don't always know. So if we're looking for discernment, if we're looking for knowledge, if we're looking for the right way to approach someone or the right way to say something to someone, if we're looking at introspection and looking at ourselves, because two things can kind of happen when we start that introspection. One, we can deny our sin and think that we don't have any. The other thing that can happen is we can become so self-critical of our own sin that we paralyze ourselves, and we're just not able to do anything to help anybody else. It's kind of that self-perception can become so critical on ourselves that it becomes unbalanced, and so we become discouraged and defeated and depressed because we think there's not anything good in us. And so even when we look at ourselves and judge ourselves, it's like Paul said, test yourselves so that you'll be able to get the prize, right? So that you don't miss the mark. But even in testing ourselves, we have to be careful that we're not too critical, that we're understanding the grace and the mercy of God. So we start out, we're going to judge others, and Jesus says, don't judge. And again, I don't think that's a blanket statement. He's trying to tell us however we judge is the way that we're going to be judged. And so then when you get down to verse 12 easily connects back to verse 7. So in everything, do to others what you would have them to do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. So in our interactions with other people, we interact with other people the way that we want other people to interact with us. And it does sum up the law and the prophets, just not this concept of judging, but even greater than that. But it also, it helps us in understanding how to approach other people. If someone were going to come to you and they saw something that they really felt that as a believer in Jesus that they really needed to talk to you about. Maybe it's something that you can't see in yourself. Maybe it's an imperfection. Maybe it's something you're not aware of. Maybe it is something that you're aware of. Maybe it is just maybe it's a rebellious type sin, like Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. And you have a brother or sister, and they're engaged in this rebellious sin, and they're not going to give it up, and you need to say something to them. Maybe you're an elder, but it doesn't matter. You're any brother or sister who sees that. When you approach them in the way that you want to be approached, and I think that is a great guideline as we look at these verses. So we have this concept of judging, and then another statement, again, that's not disconnected. I think it's very, very closely connected. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So when we're on this path of finding righteousness with God, and we're on this path of walking with God, we're looking at ourselves, we're inspecting ourselves, we're working with others, we're doing that in a way that's kind and understanding, much like or exactly like Jesus did. Jesus, he wouldn't excuse sin, but at the same time, he dealt with such compassion and love. And you remember, okay, in this task, and you're asking for wisdom and you're asking for guidance, the reality is that the gate is pretty narrow. I mean, this concept of living a godly life is, and I don't know why Siri keeps talking to me tonight, but this idea of living a godly life, the narrow gate and the wide road that leads to destruction. So as you're journeying down that road, he's going to switch, and he said, now look, you've got to watch out for false prophets. So there are those out there that are going to approach, and that they're going to look like they are godly people. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. Now, if you just go back to Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, and he says, well, don't judge. If you just take that as a blanket statement, how would you know if there was a false prophet or a true prophet if there wasn't some idea of judgment that was there? There's some idea of a discernment there, and that comes from us seeking that discernment and godly discernment from God. But there are going to be those who come that are false prophets. They're not true. You test the spirits to make sure that the spirit is from God. And it, again, falls within that concept of judging. And the way you'll know the false prophet that comes in the sheep's clothing is by their fruit. You don't get grapes from thorn bushes. You don't get figs from thistles. A good tree has good fruit, and a bad tree has bad fruit. Check time, make sure I'm okay. And a good tree can't have good fruit, and a bad tree can't. A good tree can't have bad fruit, and a bad tree can't have good fruit. And if it doesn't bear fruit at all, then you cut it down and you throw it into the fire. And even in these false prophets who come, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. So many will say, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not drive out demons or perform any miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. So even in the concept of those who are doing good, there can be false prophets, but God is still using them in a way for good. So then he gets down to the wise and foolish builders. So we're going to get all this done in one night. This is great. Then he gets to the wise and foolish builders, and this is how it fits in. So what kind of person are you supposed to be? If you go back here and you want, you're supposed to have this introspection with judgment. You're not supposed to judge other people without looking at yourself first. However you judge others is the way that you will be judged. And sometimes there will be people who reject. But if you ask and you seek and you knock, you're looking for God to give you discernment and wisdom so that you'll be able to properly discern those situations because the gate is narrow. And it's with great difficulty sometimes that only a few find it. So you're looking for that discernment, that gift of the Holy Spirit, so that you can find your way. But you realize that on the journey, there are going to be those who are false prophets who are trying to make sure that whatever happens, that you don't enter the gate. And even though sometimes it looks like they're doing really great things, or they do really great things, they're still ferocious wolves on the inside. So they're not bearing good fruit. And you follow all of that in Matthew chapter 7, and you think, well, then what is it that I'm supposed to do? How is it that I am supposed to conduct my life? What is my life supposed to look like? And he says, well, it's really simple. It's like the wise and foolish builders. What you are to do is you take the words of God and you put them into practice. And when you put them into practice, that's like the man who builds his house on the rock. And so when you build, I'm not a great builder. When you build on the rock, you build on a solid foundation. So you start asking yourselves, well, what is the foundation of my life built on? Now, the thing about the house that's built when the rain comes and the streams rise and the winds blow and they beat on the house and the house doesn't fall because its foundation is on the rock. I mean, part of that parable, I think, is understanding that storms are going to come. You're not going to exist without storms. I in Tennessee. I mean, I thought it used to be April, May, and June, but now it seems like it's even November and December when we've had like really big tornadoes. And we're not going to prevent storms from coming. Storms are going to be in our life. That there's no way to prevent those. The question when the storm comes, what is your house built on? Is it built on rock or is it built on sand? We remember the foolish man's house, right? It fell, and then the fall of it was great. We sang that in West Tennessee in Vacation Bible School the whole time I was growing up. So we're really acquainted with that song. But as you stop and you look at your life, are you a wise builder or a foolish builder? What kind of foundation are you built on? What kind of are you ready? Are you prepared for that storm when it does come? See, the thing, if you connect the wise and the foolish builders all the way back to chapter 7, verse 1, there's this theme that runs through. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Now, see, this is a given. You are going to be judged. There's going to be a time where you are judged by God, and I think the way that he writes this, that's exactly what Jesus has in mind. So the way that you judge others is the way that God is going to judge you. And when God does judge you, it's going to come back to this idea of the wise and the foolish builder. Do you take the words of Jesus and put them into practice? And if you do take them and put them into practice, then how you deal with these other things become readily apparent. Don't give dogs what is sacred. Yes, there will be some that reject the message. How do you know? How do you know there will be those that reject the message? Because with Jesus, there were those who rejected the message. I mean, they may have even looked like they were righteous people, but they weren't righteous because they didn't accept Jesus. They took what was sacred and they treated it with contempt, much like a wild dog would do, much like a pig would do if you threw a pearl to it. I mean, it takes something that's holy and good and it treats it with contempt. So how do you deal with that? Well, you deal with it in the way that Jesus dealt with it. You don't excuse it, but even with those that reject, there's some compassion and consideration for those, but there's also an understanding that there's just going to be some people who reject. How do you handle ask, seeking, and knock? I mean, how do you find that discernment? You find that discernment the same way Jesus found that discernment. It was the gift of God's Spirit. It was God's guidance that led him through life. That entering through the narrow gates, doing the things that God would have you to do. The tree and its fruit, the person who bears good fruit, like every tree bears good fruit. Well, the good tree that bears good fruit, the good person who bears good fruit is the one who hears the words of Jesus and puts them into practice. He's like the wise man who built his house on the rock. And so it very neatly ties the chapter together. So I just wanted to kind of go through that tonight and kind of hope to encourage you that when you read, look at things in context. Just don't pull one section out or just, sometimes there are what looks like kind of disconnected sayings within the teachings of Jesus. But remember, this was the end of one, I guess probably the longest sermon that we have that Jesus preached, right? The Sermon on the Mount. So, it does tie together and it fits together. So I hope that was helpful. 35 minutes. Did good with that. So, hey, thanks for tuning in. And we will be back next week at 7 o'clock to stream on Wednesday night. And then we will stream Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, the Bible class. Jesus has a better covenant. And then we will be live streaming worship Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And the sermon for Sunday morning at 10 o'clock is looking at the Exodus, some who believe and some who don't, and a close look at Pharaoh and the hardening of his heart. So please tune in for that, and I hope you have a good evening, and I will see you on Sunday morning.